they've lost.
Yeah,
and it very much ties in with the story we're going to talk about now, because when it comes to dealing with loss of our nearest and dearest, do we really shy away from talking about it?
We do, don't we? And it's something that will affect all of us at some stage in our lives. One of our next guests has called grief society's last taboo. Bereavement counsellor Julia Samuel has written a book to help people cope with the death of a loved one.
And she's joining us this morning, along with Victoria Milligan, who lost her husband and 8-year-old daughter in a boating accident. That was back in 2013. Very good morning to you both. First of all, Julia, that issue of having a place, a thing, you know, where you can go and think, it's a very important thing, isn't it, in grief?
It's really important because grief is invisible, which is how it can get so ignored and why it's important to tell stories about it and for people to read about it. But having something like a memorial, which is a touchstone to your grief, where you can kind of externally touch something that puts you in touch with the person that's died and allows you to express your grief, is incredibly helpful and very healing.
Through what some people would describe as an unimaginable, unbearable loss. Here you are now with us. I know that you look okay, that might not be the case.
She looks gorgeous.
Yeah, she looks fantastic, yeah. You are managing to live a full life, you have children that you look after now. How have you been helped over the last several years by talking about your grief?
Yes, I think there's no straight answer. You know, it's a combination of incredible support from amazing people like Julia and her charity, and friends, and a sort of inner strength and survival instinct that I think none of us really know how strong we are really until we are truly tested. I mean, I didn't think that I'd be able to cope with the level of loss and grief that I'd been given, but it is just those small achievable steps that you set yourself, that you suddenly realise that you are coping with that sort of path of grief. And I was terrified of my grief at the beginning. As you said, you know, it's unimaginable, that sort of sense of loss. And going to see Julia and a lot of the strategies that she's written about in her book, there's no manual for grief, there's no program, there's no sort of steps 1 to 10 that you're going to do this, then in 18 months' time you'll be fixed, because I know that I'll never be fixed, I'll never get over my grief, but there are a certain set of common strategies that you can follow.
And that's the interesting thing, isn't it, about this type of counselling, because many types of counselling for different types of problems, there's a resolution, isn't there? There's a positive outcome. You might be able to fix something or improve something, but there's no fix for grief.
There's no fix for grief. And, you know, paradoxically, it's the pain, allowing ourselves to feel the pain, that allows us to heal. And, you know, in the stories, and as Victoria has said, we want fixes, particularly in the 21st century. We want to find ways of kind of avoiding difficulty and having, you know, an app that if you do the 5 things. And there are things, you know, like I talk about in the book, which is exercise. I mean, probably the single biggest thing that supports you is finding people to talk to. So it wouldn't have to be a professional like me, but people that love you. When love dies, it's love that heals you. And through them, you find a way of expressing your grief, of expressing the pain, rather than blocking it with sort of negative things that get in the way. And it's often the things that we do to avoid the pain that do us most harm. Although you do want to break from it too. I mean, we talked a lot about, you know, having a focus for your grief, like remembering Emily and Nico, but also going out with friends and watching a film and not feeling guilty
about actually having a good time, because once I'd learnt that the path of grief was horrendous pain, but then it pulls away and gives you a chance to recover. Otherwise, I don't think we'd be able to cope with it. But it's remembering and facing that pain, being brave enough to face that pain, that gives you a chance of facing those emotions, working through those emotions, and having a chance for a happy future without them physically in my life, you know, in the future, and myself and my children, but in our hearts and our minds forever. And it means that every grief trigger that we see, or every restaurant we go to that we've been with them, or every bit of their favourite food that we see, is not always desperately sad. It becomes a sort of joyous memory because it feels like we're spending time with them again.
Can I ask about the how people feel clumsy around talking? I mean, you were saying how helpful it can be for friends or loved ones to say something or just do the right thing. What was your experience? I mean, you know,
It's very hard. And I
People
often
feel
think,
so awkward, don't they?
what would I have said to me? Do you know what I mean? I mean, I wouldn't have had a clue what to say to me. But as Julie always says, you know, it's acknowledging it, isn't it? It's not shying away from it or dipping down the, you know, supermarket aisle, but actually just acknowledging.
Did that happen?
Yeah.
Did people
across
actively
the
avoid?
road, I'd see people duck into shops to avoid speaking to me because it's, you know, as Julia says, it's such a taboo. People don't know what to say. They're scared. We're all scared of grief because it's sad and it's what happened to me was wrong, and they don't know what to say and how to express their feelings. But it is just acknowledge it. You know, I want to talk about Nico and Emily. They're still very much part of my life, and I think it's acknowledging that pain.
You got a thought on that one for people, or just that notion of what to do?
I think if
what
you're
to say?
a friend of someone who's been recently bereaved or is bereaved, you don't have to fix it. So by acknowledging it, by reaching towards them, connecting with them, and allow them to either talk about it or not talk about it. And that's how the different stories show that very different versions of that. You know, there's no one kind of right way of doing it. But by by being fearful, I think people are frightened that they're going to make it worse if they talk about it. And the truth is, you cannot make this worse. This terrible thing has happened. This person has died. So the thing that helps is by acknowledging it and saying, I'm so sorry this has happened to you. That's probably the single most useful sentence you can say.
And Julie, Victoria, thank you both very much for coming in
Thank
for
you.
us today. And Julie's book is called Grief Works, Stories of Life, Death and Surviving.
It is exactly 9:05. Let's take a last quick look at the headlines where you are this morning.
Good morning from BBC.